In one cataclysmic moment, millions around the globe disappear. You may have missed this headline, but Jesus returned 30 years ago, folks. Or rather, he sort of pre-returned, the warm-up act to his final return, if you will. Many faithful Christians do believe in this kind of rapture event. And in December 1995, two Christian authors teamed up and used this idea to create the most successful biblical end times thriller series we have yet seen. 2 summers ago in 2024, we overviewed the series on this podcast, yet today, Zach and I will ask how that first Left Behind novel, Book 1, has aged 30 years after its release.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
The end is nigh, not for Fantastical Truth, but here at Fantastical Truth, this podcast from Lorehaven.com, where our mission is to help you escape bad books and engage fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm Stephen Burnett. I host this podcast along with Zach, who has returned today. I'm also the publisher of Lorehaven.com and author of another scenario for the future in my novel Above the Circle of Earth, launched last year from Enclave Publishing.
Yes, and I'm Zackary Russell, and I suppose I am by default a member of the Tribulation Force because the rapture hasn't happened, and I don't know that it ever will. And this is episode 295. What if Jesus raptured his church in 1995?
Oh, them's fighting words there. Zach denied the rapture. Is he even a Christian? Well, Zach and I now are both members of the pre-tribulation force, wherever you put that. If it's spread out across the church age or a specific period of 7 years at the end, wherever you put it on the chart, you are welcome here because we're about Jesus Christ and we all agree on the circumstances of his first arrival here on earth, recently celebrated at Christmas, even if we disagree on the circumstances around his second coming. But Zach, I'll have you know that exciting things are happening in the Middle East, which does absolutely mean, according to long evangelical precedent, the end is nigh.
Yeah, and Stephen, this is one of those theological issues that I just really enjoy talking about because it's about something in the future that hasn't happened yet, and so we can all speculate on it because we don't know what's going to happen. It's very different than other theological debates we have, like about free will or predestination and so forth, because that's about things that have already happened. And it's, I don't know, the stakes seem a lot higher with stuff like that. And when we debate all the facts of the Old Testament, for example. But with the book of Revelation, with prophecy, there are so many different ways to look at it. And none of us can really prove our position right because we all agree that Jesus has not returned yet. So what does that mean for the current age? What does that mean for the circumstances of his returning? It's really fun to theorize about. And yes, I have changed my views about this over the years, even coming to a little bit firmer idea of what I believe as I've been rereading or re-listening to the Left Behind books. As we record this, I am listening to the 12th and final book in the main series, Glorious Appearing, in the audio drama format that we interviewed Todd Bastide about couple episodes back. We'll put all those links in the show notes, but really fantastic. My views notwithstanding, this is a really fun series and the audio drama just really punctuates everything so well. It's just great to hear unique voices and sound effects and music and have that fuller experience of the story. So I highly recommend that, whatever your eschatology.
Oh yeah, it's eucatastrophic there, the original eucatastrophe that all Christians can expect regardless of where we put the prefix in front of the word tribulation or in front of the word millennium. But Zach, as much of a gift as the glorious appearing imagination may be, and of course, Christians have speculated about this stuff for quite some time, and there have been other end times novels before the Left Behind series, but Left Behind 30 years ago really, really took off. And that's why we're focusing on this and kind of reopening that series that we did in summer 2024, the series called Left Behind Legacy. But Zach, it's been a couple of weeks since you and I recorded an episode. We actually would have done this one late last year, but then I got sick with the flu and at times thought that my end was nigh. What were your favorite gifts, Zach, that you got from Christmas? We're going to do the sponsor segment in a moment, but I want to know, like, okay, Zach, what'd you get? Like a kid, what'd you get for Christmas? We're at grade school. What'd you get for Christmas?
Well, something really fun I got was a shirt my wife made for me through a friend that has a t-shirt business. It says, "Typos prove you're human." And it's Y-O-U-R, not Y-O-U''RE. And so that's kind of my theme going into 2026. We've gone through the pre-AI and sort of the middle AI. Now we're kind of in the post-AI.
Post-AI.
Yeah.
I like that.
And so what does it mean that we live in this world now with AI? Well, it means that whenever I spot a typo, I know a human wrote it. And it's such a delightful thing to see typos now because you never see them with all the AI written stuff.
That's a good point.
And and it's just a wonderful, warm feeling I get. And so it's a great thing to remind people about. And also it's just a good reminder that, hey, we are not in our glorified bodies yet. And there's still going to be corruption and sin and mistakes and fallenness and brokenness in the world. And so will we make typos after Jesus comes back? That's a question, I think, for another episode.
Well, Zach, AI content generated text may be a soldier, but I will say that human-made text is solider. And those of you who have seen that particular typo in your manuscripts will know what I'm talking about. Well, that sounds like a great way, Zach, to represent Team Human, flaws and all. Speaking of end-time scenarios, one of my gifts was this one here. Game of the year, actually. Claire Obscure now, Expedition 33. I have no idea what end-time scenario is going on here. It is extremely confusing, at least at first, but I've been assured that the eucatastrophe there is beautiful. And I'm using, of course, the Tolkien word for eucatastrophe, good catastrophe, that sudden turn from doom and despair and losing to absolute victory. Speaking of which, something else I got here was, here we go. Yeah, that's it's this poster here that shows it's a total 2CV violation, Zach. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yeah.
There's a Christian artist. This is not AI, it's Photoshop. Of literally Jesus hugging the late Charlie Kirk. It is a little bit cheesy, but I will allow it. And there was this quote, "I am nothing without Jesus, Charlie Kirk," which is super cool. I need to find a great place to hang that. And then there's my Zack Snyder's Justice League giant desktop mouse pad, which that's no end times relation whatsoever. It was just a really cool gift that I got, and it's like trimmed with this little LED strip and everything. Exciting holiday season for us all. And those of you who enjoyed last week's episode where I did the solo show know that I covered like a bunch of stories all at once. But yeah, we're focusing on this one now. Not even the stuff that we covered in our series about Left Behind a couple of summers ago. End times debates, all that stuff. Those links are all in the show notes should you wish to go further in a direction that we're not going today. We're just focusing on the OG novel Left Behind, released in late 1995. This is my original copy right here, Zach, this paperback. And I have no idea where these stains are from on the pages. I have a hardcover too, but it doesn't match my other hardcovers. And yes, I own way too many of those books. Speaking of books, though, we have revised the Lorehaven library. It looks better. It runs a little faster. And we're back to weekly reviews at lorehaven.com, such as our review 2 weeks ago for Sons of Day and Night by Mariposa Arestio. And then I just wrote a review of Stephen R. Lawhead's novel Taliesin, just in time for the book quest that we're doing in the Guild and in time for the streaming adaptation by Daily Wire Plus. Go to lorehaven.com and see all that good stuff, along with our new article arranged by Daniel White IV called Behold Our Top Most Anticipated New Books and Movies for 2026. And then this Thursday after episode release, I've got an article coming out called Discern the Top 3 Negative Evangelical Myths About Popular Culture. Now, a quick pre-announcement as well for those of you who follow Lorehaven, listen here, who are trying not only to find great stories, but create your own stories. Well, until now, we haven't really had anything for you because there's lots of other people doing that stuff. But next week on this podcast, and we'll release an article about the new Lorehaven authorship. The Lorehaven authorship, and those of you who are in the guild already know a little something about what that is, because we have soft launched in there, but we're going to make it more public in the coming weeks. Subscribe free at lorehaven.com, get updates, and then you can also get that access code to join the Lorehaven Guild. But if you go to our site and look at the announcement, there's actually a public code for the guild that we're going to be running through the end of January. But please do subscribe. It really does help us grow this little mission. And so do sponsorships like this one from Oasis Family Media, the parent company of our friends Enclave Publishing. This is for the conclusion of the Fireborn epic trilogy from author Gillian Bronte Adams. And it is called Of Dawn and Embers. So if you want to think about Christ diving down out of the clouds on that supernatural white horse, awesome. But everybody rides kind of a supernatural horse in this world that Gillian has created. He rides a dawnling, a steed of light and glory, destined to restore. Jakim Hanor will save his people, or so says the prophecy that upended his life and drove his brothers to betray him. Now he has returned as the Dawn Rider to fulfill his purpose and reconcile with his brothers, only to find himself embroiled in a war. Captured in the fallout of a deadly attack, Rafi grapples with the ghosts of the past. His brother is alive, but no longer himself, and Rafi will stop at nothing to save him. Farther up the coast, Caradwin strives to reignite the embers of the rebellion to burn the empire down. When Rafi is sentenced to execution before the imperial court, Caradwin must rally every spear and steed she can for a blistering strike at the heart of the capital. But the empire's schemes are already in motion. There's more to that back cover. You can go to lorehaven.com/podcast to see that. Enclave Escape is excited to present Of Dawn and Embers, the highly anticipated finale in the award-winning Fireborn epic trilogy from author Gillian Bronte Adams. It is now available wherever awesome books are sold. It's also available as an audiobook narrated by the author, Gillian herself, from Oasis Audio. Yeah, lorehaven.com/podcast. See the sponsors at the top. We rotate them out. And if you want to join the sponsorship, you can find the link there as well under author resources. You can also find in our episode page for this all the quotes and notes I mentioned earlier. Zach and I have a lot to say about a series that kind of technically concluded in the mid-2000s. But guys, the Left Behind series went big. And let me just remind you of some of the quotes from outside, way outside the Christian bubble, which was kind of odd, because the Left Behind series is an extremely Christian series, and it is all about evangelism and trying to save the readers. So at least at the time, the advice you get now for Christian creators was basically defied by these guys, and they went further with their thriller series than almost anybody. Publishers Weekly said this is the most successful Christian fiction series ever, and until arguably The Chosen, which is on TV now by Jenkins's kid, Dallas Jenkins, now grown up, that remained true. And it's still the most successful speculative Christian fiction series ever. New York Times observed combines Tom Clancy-like suspense with touches of romance, high-tech flash, and biblical references. So these guys were catching up to the series later when, it did get a little more sci-fi at the midpoint of the tribulation. And then Entertainment said, call it what you like. The Left Behind series now has a label its creators could have never predicted: blockbuster success. This was the back cover of Left Behind Book 1, published in late 1995. In one cataclysmic moment, millions around the globe disappear. Vehicles suddenly unmanned, careen out of control. People are terror-stricken as loved ones vanish before their eyes. In the midst of global chaos, airline captain Rayford Steele must search for his family, for answers, for truth. As devastating as the disappearances have been, the darkest days may lie ahead. Zach, I've already noticed, at least in comparison with the book cover we just read before this, book covers used to be a lot shorter in those days, or maybe different publishers have different philosophies about those. What's fascinating there is that you cannot tell from that book cover that this is a Christian end times thriller, other than the subtitle, A Novel of the Earth's Last Days. So I'm going to veer straight to chapter 1 and talk about how Left Behind, again, book 1, just focusing on book 1, not the series, Left Behind proclaims gospel truth, asterisk. Listen for the asterisk here, but let's start with the true. This book really wants to tell the gospel and illustrate a potential gospel end time scenario in order to get people saved. It's a product of deep biblical Christian and uniquely evangelical desire to see new people who don't know Jesus, or who maybe grew up in church and they've done what some people call backsliding. This book wants you by the end to be a Christian so that you too will not be left behind at this view of the rapture. And the two authors largely make this work. You got two names on the front of every single book. The first is nonfiction author Tim LaHaye, who is a prophecy wonk, but he also wrote, along with Beverly LaHaye, I believe, a book called The Act of Marriage, which is not about end times at all. It's about something much less interesting, sex. So he's known for that. But he also gets Jerry B. Jenkins, who's a fiction writer. And if you want to know more about him, we've got his interview from a couple of years ago. Jerry B. Jenkins largely wrote the book. He came up with the characters and all that, but Tim LaHaye had input and obviously was framing the plot because of his particular view of the end times, which many, many, many good Jesus-loving Christians share. Both men, however, are evangelicals. They want the gospel spread. Jenkins said that when he asked Tim LaHaye, well, who's this for? Is this for believers or non-believers? And Tim LaHaye said, yes. And Jerry Jenkins says, that's not going to work. You got to pick one or the other. But LaHaye insisted. They tried to reach both of them, and they caught lightning in a bottle in this case.
Well, and I just got to say there, look, I'm biased to already like the books. And that was how I came into them in the early 2000s, because I was going into ministry. And I'm like, wow, a fiction series, a thriller series that's evangelistic. That's really cool. Like, that's exactly in line with what I care about and with what I want to read and tell other people to read. And so I'll just totally put my cards on the table that's what got me into the books. And that's why they still have a soft spot for me, because I'm still in full-time, vocational ministry. And I think that's one of the strongest aspects of the books, is that you have characters in every book sharing the gospel with other characters, or sharing their testimony, or wrestling through areas of doubt and growing in their faith. And so you have Christianity at large, and evangelicalism in particular, being celebrated and being kind of the focus and the good guy of a story. And isn't it about time we had that with so many books that we read where, Naomi was just watching a movie the other day, and a character appears on screen with a cross, and Naomi immediately is like, I'll bet that's the villain. And yeah, sure enough, in 10 minutes, that character is some psychopath killer.
Roast that chestnut on an open fire.
So, already I wanted to like these books for the reason, for the spiritual purpose of it. Now, there are some downsides to that we'll get into, but as a positive side, I appreciate the faithful purpose of those books, that it wasn't using Christianity to subvert Christians or the gospel. It wasn't just putting Christianity as a window dressing to sell a thriller book or something. Like, it was a deeply Christian series.
I first discovered the series in the late 90s, although not the same year it released. It was 1997 at the Holy Land Tour in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, also home of the Great Passion Play. I don't remember whether we saw the play, but we saw their replica of the Tabernacle and talked with cosplayers. It's basically, Colonial Williamsburg, only Bible version in Eureka Springs. And the gift shop had this book on it called Left Behind, the very paperback copy I'm holding up right now. I was a teen at the time. My parents felt it was okay, so I got it. It was like the first grown-up fiction book I'd ever purchased on my own that wasn't already on my parents' shelves. And I read it, and I liked it. And yeah, I became a member of the fandom. And I'm still, I think, a member of the fandom. I know the trivia, I know the characters, I know the end time scenarios, even if my end times beliefs now may be a little bit different. So like you, Zach, I think that puts me in a unique position. But the important thing here is that, yeah, the novel shares a goal with other thriller novels. And from that back cover description, you can't tell it's meant to be a Christian end time scenario. So that's very carefully written. And I think that's a very wise choice there. But I do think that puts this novel right there on the field with other general market novels based on possible futures, telling a plot-driven story, yet very often wanting to provoke a reader response. Who was it who said, maybe it was Ray Bradbury who said, or maybe it's an apocryphal quote, that science fiction can also be a warning, not just a forecast. We want people not to make the evil nanotech horde or provoke a nuclear war or things like that. In this case, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins have a different scenario in mind. They believe that the Antichrist is coming, the tribulation is coming, and it is, in some sense, a judgment of God on earth. Although much later, they also really, really wanted to emphasize the point that God is using these things to get your attention. And I go, well, don't bypass the judgment, though. But it was kind of cool to see the characters thinking out loud about, okay, do we talk about hellfire and judgment, or do we talk about, God's love? And it gets kind of meta on the page right there. We'll say that this led to some side effects for some readers, although I don't think I was among them at the time. Although the full gospel is presented here, including repentance and faith. So this isn't Touched by an Angel, another 90s series. It's just saying God loves you. He loves you so much. And then maybe you see some of God's earthly wrath here and there, but we don't talk about hell or repentance that much. Hell is mentioned in the book. It is a reality. Repentance is certainly part of that conversion moment. At times, though, just because the villain is not Satan at first in the book, it's the Antichrist, a European leader who's evil, actually. Just because of that thrust there are some side effects of sin and God's wrath seem to be less of a threat than Antichrist and the tribulation. That's just kind of unavoidable, I think. There's also, of course, because of the particular evangelical origin of the authors, there's a lot of emphasis on sinner's prayer. All right. Different Christians think differently about that. I mean, some people wake up and realize, oh, I did believe at some point I did repent, and I believe that Jesus is my Savior and Lord, and I want to love him more than my sin, and I'm going to join a church and do all that good stuff. But they can't pin it on a particular moment when they repeated a thing in a particular place. This is just the Holy Spirit at work, guys. We don't want to take this casually. And if you've not prayed the prayer, then hey, yeah, that's a really good idea. Pray the sinner's prayer. Okay, that too is wisdom, but it is also tradition, and so it's not required. You may already be a Christian and you just don't remember exactly when that happened. So good Christians can disagree and debate that. And of course, good Christians disagree with this end times scenario. All right. It's not the only game in town. There are other charts where they put the arrows in a different place, or they have like 1,000-year church history period, or tribulation period, rather than the 7-year period. But the late Tim LaHaye, who, by the way, by now does have the correct end times view for sure, and Jerry Jenkins, they would have been the first to tell you, yes, we know our view is one of many. We know that different Christians have different views. That's okay. What matters is that we agree on the gospel truth. So that's what I meant by the asterisk earlier. Gospel truth is in the book, but it does not include this particular tribulation scenario. The authors would have agreed with that, but hey, frankly, their view of the end times is a bit more interesting and concrete than the post-millennial brothers and sisters who kind of leave things a little bit more vague because they don't really know. I don't even know if an amillennialist could write an end times thriller. The fact is, these guys could do it. And so in order to make the story work and the genre work, well, of course, they're going to say, hey, this is how we think it's going to be. Either take the ride or stay at the station.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is, like you said, they were aware, and of course, about the other eschatology views, but they just kind of assume their view, and they just kind of assume that that's the view other people will come to now that the rapture has happened. I mean, spoiler, happens in the very beginning of the first book, pretty much. But it's not like a theological, eschatological debate throughout the whole book. They don't hit you over the head with like, don't you realize this about 1 Thessalonians 4? And haven't you thought about this with Daniel or whatever? Like they just kind of like go from the position of this is the view and here's how the story is going to unfold. And so I found that kind of interesting that, okay, it wasn't like preachy in that way. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't like, we're going to convince you that the pre-trib rapture view is the correct view of the end times. They don't do any of that. Now, there is a side effect, and I'm going to just kind of sprinkle some of my critiques throughout this time rather than saving it all for the end or something.
Oh yeah, same. Yeah, of course there's going to be some critiques. I'm sure Jenkins himself would have some criticisms in retrospect.
And one of my main criticisms for this book is that there's sort of this theme in it of, I told you so. And that gets pretty much said in almost every book in some way or another. And you even have a character saying, read the book, we win. You have these characters like constantly regretting, why didn't I trust Christ before he came back to rapture the church? I wish I would have listened instead of getting left behind. I mean, that's like the overall theme of the book. And that's the overall purpose of like, hey, you should read about the end times so that you don't go through them. Trust Christ now. And again, I think there is a certain merit to that. I mean, you had Jesus himself telling people it would be better to pluck out your eye than to go into hell with both your eyes. It'd be better to cut off your hand if that's going to keep you out of the kingdom than to go into hell with both your hands. Now he's using hyperbole. This is not a literal advice. Let's just get that out of the way. But he's trying to emphasize the reality of hell and the severity of hell. And in many other parables, he talked about not simply the end times, but the final judgment of man. And so Jesus often used literal like prophecy, but also metaphor and story to emphasize how bad a life apart from God will be. And so again, at a fundamental level, I totally agree with the purpose of the book. But yeah, there's a certain I don't want to judge like motives or character, but just that sort of that message of like, you should have listened to me. It gets kind of off-putting to me after a while.
It can be. And that's why I think even in narrative in the later volumes, I guess we are talking a little about the later volumes, but it starts here. There is an emphasis on God's love and almost an overemphasis, arguably, on God is using these events to get your attention. He's trying to break through your resistance because he loves you so much. He wants you to be saved, even if you missed the rapture. There are still now 7 years of war and pestilence and plagues to make that choice before you get reprobate, because the mark of the beast is kind of a removal of that free will. The title, though, of Left Behind, I'll close with this. I mean, it comes from the 1969 Larry Norman song, I Wish We'd All Been Ready.
Right,
so
yeah.
that tone of regret is right there in that song. I wish we'd all been ready. And it's like kind of this folk song. It's a Jesus movement of expressing regret that you missed out on the rapture. And it actually makes an allusion to what I will argue is a misunderstanding of Christ's Olivet discourse when he says, that two men will be grinding in the field, or one will be taken and the other left. The one who's taken is being washed away by the flood. And somehow that got reversed in some Christian evangelical teaching, and now the one who's taken is the one who's escaping the disaster. Well, that doesn't work with Christ's metaphor, but that's just where we've got to be careful about our traditions, right? I mean, we do want to make sure that we are saying with conviction things about which all Christians agree. The gospel, Jesus is Lord, he is coming soon, like all that stuff that we do agree on, but also keep second things. But when you're writing fiction, I mean, you are, of course, like you said, Zach, you're assuming your future is the real one. Like, I'm not going to put in my sci-fi novels like, well, this is just one future, and go way too far into the concessions, and then you just got candy wrappers from the concessions all over the place. It just doesn't work. So it's more about training the readers to understand the series rather than quibbling with the authors. I saw a lot more backlash from Christians who didn't like this series at all, that aired way too far on the side of untruth. I actually saw, speaking of truth here, close with this, I actually saw an evangelical publication, a writer in that publication saying that there was nothing Christian about the Left Behind series other than the fact that they mention Jesus and take communion sometimes, which is just a lie. No one in this series ever takes communion. And you might object to that more than them taking communion. That was just slander. And God used this series, Zach, in yours and my life at various times to illustrate those deeper truths about the gospel. That's what I came away with in the series, even if Christians may debate what exactly happens at the end of this era of history.
Yeah. And look, as I share my critiques, I should make it clear, I do believe in a literal 7-year tribulation period, in a premillennial return of Christ. That is, Christ returns and then the millennial kingdom happens. And that's all a physical, literal kingdom on the physical earth. actually that period is even a bigger debate, right? So I actually really like everything in this book after the rapture, which is a funny way of saying.
Yeah, you can just skip book 1 and then ignore the references, and hey, post-tribbers can have a good time too.
Right. So I like it for that reason. But what I really like about the continual gospel presentation, evangelism, salvation of people, is that it shows that the Christian faith actually matters. That in our modern world, which is full of tons of idolatry, social persecution, legal persecution, cultural persecution, physical and violent persecution. There's all kinds, Jesus said there are all kinds of persecutions. So I don't want to minimize what someone experiences from their family just because their head's not getting chopped off, or something. It's every persecution matters. And by the way, I'm directly rebutting a common line that I hear from people of like, well, what Americans face is nothing compared to what Iranians face or whatever. And it's like, okay, they're different kinds of persecutions, but it still matters. But this book shows that your faith matters, that it makes a difference. It gives you that strength to stand up against persecution. And that's a fantastic message.
It is. And I think a lot of Christians are now strengthened for persecution if the post-tribbers end up right on this one. Maybe because of the Left Behind series, all of us are a little bit more prepared just in case the actual chart in reality turns out different from the chart that we have in the back of our study Bibles. Well, jumping genres, I'm going to go to the completely opposite side of the library here for our second sponsor, new as of last week, author Tully Cole, who, unlike a grown-up series about the end times and apocalypse and all that, she has wacky whimsy, daring adventures, Christian values, the Nancy and Wilbur series, the ongoing tale of an unusual dragon and a unique boy, has it all. In the case of the Heartstone, a trip to the bridge market shoves Nancy and Wilbur headlong into a mystery. An irreplaceable treasure has been stolen from their good friend, Mr. Nathaniel Warty Troll. Will Nancy and Wilbur be able to uncover the truth behind the theft before it is too late? The game is afoot. Written by Tully Cole and illustrated by Lauren Austin, The Case of the Heartstone is the third book in the middle grade Nancy and Wilbur series. All 3 books in this middle grade fantasy series can be discovered on Amazon. And you can see that fun cover in the show notes for this episode. Sponsor links at the top of that page. Chapter 2. We've talked about the truth. Now let's talk about the good. The story, I noticed, Zach, setting the precedent here in Left Behind Book 1, has unbelievers who are the good guys. And that really is more confined to Book 1 because viewpoint characters throughout the rest of the series, I think with little exception, are already saved, okay? And I think Left Behind is underrated for this. The protagonists are non-believers who are the good guys to some extent and maybe to a fault, even before they become Christians. The back cover emphasizes Rayford Steele, fantastic pilot name, by the way. And if you think that's unrealistic, you should see the names of the astronauts for Artemis 2, by the way. But there's also Buck Cameron Buck Williams, who is a, I'll have to explain this for our audience. Back in the days, we used to have a thing called news magazines, and they would print them out once every couple of weeks or so. Yeah, they were in paper. You'd find them in airports. And that was how you got kind of the second or third draft of history after the AM radio and eventually even some websites over your dial-up modem. So this is back in the days of dial-up modems, okay? And Buck Williams is a news magazine journalist. He will go out, following after the cable news crew. Wasn't that old, you did have cable news back then. And he would do the second or third draft of history, interviewing the newsmakers, globetrotting, all that stuff. And he's a total good guy, okay? He's not a player. He's not bad media. This is a evangelical Christian writing a story about a good newsman. Buck Williams has high ethics, and so does Rayford Steele, by the way. It's actually kind of works against his favor because both of these guys, to some extent, but mostly Rayford, are just decent, upstanding folks. And Rayford is married. He has 2 children. He has a nice home in the Chicago suburbs. He makes a decent living as an airline pilot. And at least until now, he's been a loving husband and father. His kids are turning out okay. His oldest daughter, Chloe, is going to college in California. And we find out later that she was surprisingly chaste and didn't get up to any funny business with the fellas. Buck also is surprisingly chaste. And yeah, that's okay. That's kind of unrealistic, guys. But frankly, it keeps them drama free. And maybe it's not totally impossible. Remember, cast your mind back 30 years. We're still in neutral world. There's some influence from evangelical Christianity that has a positive effect, even among cultural Christians like Rayford, Buck, and to some extent, Chloe. And then finally, he's not a viewpoint character, but there's a pastor in the series, Bruce Barnes, who is like a fairly decent fellow. He's helping run a New Hope Village Church, nice interdenominational name there in Mount Prospect, Illinois. And yet, here's the kind of subversion here, particularly for some evangelical readers. All of these good people lack Jesus, and their cultural Christianity, their worldly righteousness will cause them to drift further into sin and away from that cultural Christianity, which cannot save you. That's what leads to the rather locally famous opening of the novel, which is a darn good hook, if you ask me. Rayford Steele's mind was on a woman he had never touched. So without Jesus, and as we've seen, unfortunately, even with Jesus, those temptations can creep in. And it seems that Rayford Steele's family man decency will only last so long. And that's why all four of these folks are left behind. This really caused a lot of disturbance among the readers. Hold on a second. A pastor was left behind, even though he preached sermons, even though he talked about Jesus, he even gave the sinner's prayer, and he himself wasn't saved. Well, this is a warning not just to obvious non-believers who might pick up the novel, but it sounds the trumpet blast in the ears of cultural Christians who may have picked up this book because they read Christian fiction, and then suddenly they're getting this very severe, stern warning. Hey, you may still be left behind if you have not personally trusted in Jesus Christ. Even if you're a pastor, even if you're a decent family man or an upstanding journalist with integrity.
And this is another strong point of the book. I mean, this is almost straight out of Matthew 7, where Jesus said, "Many will appear before me, and I will say, I did not know you." And they'll go on to brag about, didn't we do these good works? Didn't we heal people and prophesy? And he'll say, I never knew you. And man, Stephen, when I was in high school, I heard this sermon basically that is stuck with me now for almost 30 years, where a guy said, there are only three types of people in the world: the lost, the religious lost, and the saved. And that middle section of the religious lost, I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I've been most of my life. And I was newly a Christian at that time, but it really helped me to see where I had come from and what so many people around me, where they were. And again, this is in the 90s. So it's very much in that neutral world, like you said, where we have a lot of cultural Christianity and a lot of people that think, hey, I'm fine. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't get in trouble. I'm a good citizen. You know, I don't go out and cause trouble and whatever, but do you know Jesus? You know, that's the ultimate question that's going to be asked. And a few years later, when I started learning Chinese, there was another fascinating insight where there's two different words in Chinese for to know. So you can know a fact and you can know a person. And those are different words. And that also really helped me to understand this. And that was a great emphasis of this first book of like, hey, you're doing all these good things. Okay, you're having this mental, emotional affair, but at least you haven't touched a woman, you know. You're going to church, you know, but you know, you don't know Jesus in either case. So it's not your avoidance of sin, or it's not your surface level good things. It's not your job. That's not going to save you. And yes, it's obviously about the rapture, like who gets taken, right, in a good way. But is at the core of it is this emphasis of, are you actually saved? You know, are your good works going to save you? Is your you know, teetotaling going to save you? Is your you know, working for justice through media going to save you? Is your, you know, being a good student at college going to save you? No, none of that's going to save you. Only Jesus will save you. And that's a great emphasis in this book.
Well, despite the novel's rightful, understandable emphasis on salvation, which is saving grace, I think that by intent or otherwise, you also see this wonderful illustration here then of common grace. And you see common grace, theologians observe that just based on the fact that we're still living in God's world. He has still built in a lot of measures to keep the good things going, like even weather patterns. Like Jesus alludes to this when he says that our good God causes the rain to fall on the righteous and unrighteous alike. And even people know to give good gifts for their children. Government can be a common grace. See Romans 13. And even some people hate this because they got bad church back home experience, but even cultural Christianity can be a common grace. Now, this book shows, I think, both edges of the sword there. Yes, it's good to have decent family man airline captains, even if they are thinking lustful thoughts about the head flight attendant, but for the passengers, it's still good. He gets them where they want to go. He keeps himself grounded if he's not feeling it, or if he's a little tipsy after the party. That's good. We want these things. We wouldn't be able to run a world, even a sinful world, without them. We want journalists who have high ethical standards. And yes, they do still exist. And I think even though it may seem unrealistic for a college-aged person from a just moral but not quite Christian family, it may seem unrealistic for her to have never gotten frisky with the fellas. But maybe we've looped around even 30 years later, and more people are probably like that. And that's good. That's good. We want that. But it's not enough to save you. It really isn't. That morality can backfire on you because now you feel pretty spiritual, thank you very much, without specifically believing in Jesus Christ. And, you're good. If there is a heaven, you're going to go there. If not, well, whatever. I got things to do and money to earn. Jenkins here answers, though, for Christians who may think that only the ugly, gross, worst of the worst sinners will be left behind. Jenkins answers, no, it's going to be these morally decent people. I'm going to throw a wrench in your little moral simplicity there. There will be nice people who thought they were Christians, people who, frankly, might sin less than some Christians. Those people will be left behind. So the standard is not moral decency or cultural Christianity. The standard is something else. Even without the label, they never mention this, but Left Behind shows common grace in action, even though it's emphasizing specific grace. And I think that's a great way to do it. You can illustrate common grace, but not rhapsodize about it. It is kind of ordinary in the world, and that's good. But you need to celebrate the specific saving grace. And by the way, of course, not just to be saved from the Antichrist, but also to be saved from God's wrath, saved from the natural consequences of sin. And not just to go to heaven someday or escape an end times doom, but so that you can live in eternity in heaven and then on the new heavens and new earth with Jesus as your king. And altogether, I think, despite any reader overreaction one way or another, that is a good thing.
And that's where this book, it could have been just a standalone. It could have just been, hey, the message is that don't just be a good person, be a saved person. Make sure you actually know Jesus, so that when he returns, you will be with him. And that would be fine. But, this is obviously the first of 12 books because the reader naturally wants to know, well, what happens next? Like what goes on through the tribulation? And that's what they go through. And that's what makes this series fun because, okay, from the first book what's going to happen, right? There's going to be a 7-year tribulation period. All these people are going to die. The Antichrist will take over. And you also know that Jesus will return physically. So on a macro scale what's going to happen, but not on the micro scale. And that's what I think this series does really well. You start to really get concerned with the fate of all the characters and how they look out for each other and have to rescue each other at times and how they lose one another at times. And so it has that very personal feel to it. It's not just like reading the newspaper. It's like you're going on a journey with these characters. And again, even more so with the audio drama, because you hear all these unique voice actor voices portraying them. But this is also, in a way, the kind of the Achilles heel of the eschatology here. So here's where I'm going to kind of plant my flag. The idea of a pre-tribulation rapture is the idea of a secret second coming, right?
Yeah, it's like a warm-up act. You split the second coming into the second and third coming, and it's really what it ultimately does.
And I think that directly contradicts Matthew 24, which says 26 and 27 his arrival will be unmistakable. He says, don't let anyone tell you he's already come. And so I think it violates that. It violates Acts 1, 10 through 12, which says, in the same way that you saw him leave, you'll see him return. So the angels are telling the disciples he's going to return physically, visibly to all, just like he said, if like lightning is visible from the east and the west. And then in Revelation 19, we see him coming down from heaven. Okay. So, that's why I don't particularly believe in the pre-trib rapture. I do believe in a post-trib rapture. I think we're all going to see him at the same time, not secretly. But also, the Achilles heel of this book, okay, is that the idea of the pre-tribulation rapture is based on 1 Thessalonians 5:9. For God did not appoint us to suffer wrath. So the idea is that we get raptured so that we don't go through the wrath of the tribulation. However,
but then other Christians do.
Exactly. And like I said,
they're not the
one,
us. The verse isn't for them. Yeah.
In book one, once Bruce Barnes, spoiler, becomes an actual Christian, he starts looking at the prophecies and he's like, I think only a quarter of us are going to survive by the end of the tribulation. And yeah, that's what happens. Like only a quarter of their group and only a quarter of the whole earth survives. So how do you square that with the idea of like, oh, believers will be spared wrath? Well, the only way to square that is to say there's essentially two classes of Christians. There's the pre-rapture Christians and the post-rapture Christians. And kind of an upper class and a lower class, all right? Well, that's pretty much a contradiction of Ephesians 4, that there's one hope, or Ephesians 3, you are all one in Christ Jesus. And so ultimately, after rereading the series, I'm like, I don't like this. I don't have this view of the church, that there is essentially the upper and lower Christians based on when you received Christ in relation to the tribulation.
Well, Zach, some would view this scenario, which is called dispensationalism, with three classes of Christians. And the folks who got saved before the rapture, they're actually second class. The post-trib saints are third class. The first classers are Jews who get saved, the 144,000, because they're like the first covenant people of God from an earlier dispensation. And, that's a whole other episode. And if you want to fight
they're like invincible
over that,
too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. At least technically we all are until God calls us home. But if you want to get more into the end times prophecies debate, Zach and I do that in episode 216, which, by the way, later in the Left Behind series, that number takes on specific significance. However, if you would like to think of a different kind of future, stay tuned for this next sponsor, myself, E. Stephen Burnett, with my novel Above the Circle of Earth, which did launch 10 months ago, early March of 2025. And this is for those who are okay with a different future for Christians, knowing that Jesus can return at any moment. It could be next week, or it could be a couple of centuries from now, with lots of time to do space stuff in between. And that is this story. It's for grown-up readers, but appropriate for teens. Standalone with series potential. It's the origin story of the space mission when Brock and Alicia Rivers and their young family are finally able to find hope out of exile on Mars for a bad decision that Brock and Alicia made back before they had their child, that ended up getting them exiled by the secular state, the cause that rules all the solar system. But in order to oppose them and also get the gospel into places where it needs to be, there it is again with the overt Christianity, right? They need to start the space mission. But unfortunately, they're going to face not only the ever-looming threat of the secular cause, but also a lot of dark forces from within their own people, some of whom are quite happy in the preserved system of the next century and do not want to see their shelter threatened. That's the description for Above the Circle of Earth from Enclave Publishing. But I want to give a shout out to those of you who are going back over their reads of last year, and they are mentioning Above the Circle of Earth as one of their top reads of 2025. If you're listening, my thanks to you. Really appreciate that encouragement. This is a different kind of novel, even among Christian fantastical circles, most of which is, as I mentioned last week, romantic type stories or romantasy or royal drama. Those are the rulers. And so just to get a story out here that's been embraced by both male and female readers for grownups, that's, even though it's teen appropriate, that is just a great encouragement to me personally. And I want to let you know what's next for the space mission. So join the space mission at estephenburnett.com. That's my author website. It's tied to Lorehaven, but it's not the same thing. But most folks who subscribe to Lorehaven updates can also check the box and get updates from myself. And they are separate because Lorehaven publishing is a little different from me getting after my own favorite genres there. And so I get to do both there, which is super fun. So chapter 3, speaking of doing both, I want to talk real quick here about the style of Left Behind, which really, so we talked about the truth, the goodness. Now, this really is about the beauty and the style of the book. And I've seen some unfair criticisms of the style of the book, and I've made some unfair criticisms, which I no longer make. Functional and practical, the novel is written by design to be as widely read as possible. That's not speculation. That's what Jerry Jenkins said, because Jerry Jenkins, even when he wrote Left Behind, I think he said he'd already written 100 books. The guy is an absolute speed demon. And he calls himself a journeyman author. That means that he will rise to the occasion of what the genre demands, whether it's sports biography, ministry biography, some nonfiction here and there, fiction, whether it's a detective story, a romantic story, historical, whatever. He just goes where the genre rules are. And that is his goal. That was the goal of Tim LaHaye as well, to make a book that's going to be as accessible as possible because, hey, we want to tell a rip-roaring yarn while also get as many people saved as possible, right? This is not meant to be literary fiction. It's not meant to stand the test of time. Jenkins has written some other books that may qualify for that. But here, the chapters are short. The style is simple, 8th grade reading level and all of that. And by the way, at least the first edition of the book, it's actually a pretty thick book, 468 pages from start to finish there, apart from front matter and back matter. 468 pages, but the font is large, the margins are wide, and there's lots of white space, particularly when the dialogue gets going. And it's like, a few words in one line of dialogue. All of these are intended to invite as many readers in as possible. This is kind of a populist story. So for those who think that the book or the series has a bad rep for not meeting goals that they themselves bring in from other books with other goals, I think these critics reveal their ignorance or possibly a little streak of elitism there. Left Behind isn't trying to be a timeless classic. It is intended to be functional and practical. And yes, we've talked about this a little, but some of the content is really, really time-bound now, 30 years later. Dial-up modems are kind of the high technology, at least of this story. The cell phones only show up sporadically, but then as the series goes on, suddenly everybody's got a cell phone, and it seems that everybody's got Wi-Fi, and then you move in some more techno-thriller elements there. And then I think there was actually a revised version of the series that updated the technology, but that was like 10, 15 years ago. So how many more times are you going to update it? Jerry Jenkins told us in our interview with him in 2024 that he's content to leave the series as is. He's like, hey, yeah, it's a product of its time. It started in 1995, and like maybe it just needs to stay there. And I actually agree with that. I think that is just a great way to honor where it was. But also it kind of increasingly becomes an alternate history, going right to our title there. What if Jesus raptured his church in 1995?
Speaking of the whole populist angle of this, I think that is where these books could find a new audience today, 30 years later. And for a very specific reason. I think it appeals to people who just watched not only Charlie Kirk getting assassinated on internet video all over the world, but then watching their friends and family and coworkers and acquaintances and tons of pundits celebrate it. That was truly the worst part of that whole thing for a lot of people, because a lot of people didn't really even follow Charlie Kirk, or maybe just a little bit here and there watched him. But when they saw people that they knew that were otherwise normal, when they saw school teachers, when they saw their plumber, when they saw their neighbor, when they saw people at their church, celebrating, excusing, minimizing, whatever, it was deeply, deeply unsettling for a lot of people. And I've thought about that in relation to the Left Behind series. Again, less so in the first book, more in the rest of the series. Believers get hunted down and executed by the Carpathia regime, the Antichrist. And there's even crowds of people cheering when that happens. And I remember reading this the first time, Stephen, thinking, that's not going to happen. That's kind of ridiculous. I just had no concept of like a cheering mob killing Christians. Well, we're in a very different world now than when this was written. I mean, we're now, first of all, in the post 9/11 world, where there is major violent persecution happening in many parts of the world from Islamic terrorism. We're seeing stuff like that right now happening in Nigeria. It's across the Middle East, and I mean, even Iran right now is in the center of the news because of a very big populist uprising against the theocratic tyranny there. But because for one of the reasons is because it imprisoned and executed Christians quite publicly and unashamedly. But now with the Charlie Kirk assassination, I think we've all kind of seen like, wow, there is an undercurrent of rage and hatred among a lot of otherwise ordinary people. And I noticed that one of the effects of that was a lot of people said, you know what? I'd been thinking about going to church and now I really need to do that. And there were tons of people that went to church for the first time, back in that, what was it, mid-September. But also as we've said, what this series points to is it's not enough just to be a conservative or political guy. It's not enough just to go out and get people to vote. It's not enough just to be a guy that goes to church. Like, you need to actually know Jesus. Like, it's not enough just to live a nicer life and put on a suit and be a kinder person or whatever. Like, you need to have your eternity figured out. And praise God, I've actually seen a lot of people post things like that. Like, wow, okay, I really need to figure this out. I bought a Bible and I'm reading it. I joined a Bible study and we're going through it. Hey, I have these questions and like, can you answer these questions? I've seen a lot of openness like that. And so I think that these books, especially the first one, really could appeal to that newly culturally conservative person, a newly Christian, cultural Christian person that's like, people really hate the side of Christians. Like, maybe I should join that side. Well, don't just join a side, join the kingdom of God.
Absolutely. Maybe it's for that reason that volumes of the Left Behind series still hit the Amazon bestseller lists, and they are technically science fiction at points. So I think last time I checked, like, they'd even pull ahead of Above the Circle of Earth. So, that's fair. You guys have been around much, much longer, and it is definitely meant to be accessible. I will note a few things in closing, just to be kind of fair. And this may seem a little critical, but it is something that I've grown to appreciate rather than condemn. There are moments, especially in book one, where Left Behind, book one, kind of distances the reader from some really potentially heavy emotional moments. And I now think that is actually by design, so that you can kind of dip into those moments, but not get in too deep. Like, there's a safe distance there, and maybe a respect for more sensitive readers. But there are moments where, like, you actually do feel the emotion, like Rayford finding his vanished family. That's an emotional high point to the story. And of course, the audio drama has no such compunctions. They go there, and you're weeping or celebrating or getting angry. They actually bring in a lot of the audio. So now I can kind of, if I reread the books, I'll be hearing their voices, and the emotions will kind of be brought in from that faithful adaptation. Other scenes, however, particularly violent scenes like a car bombing, they really get summarized at a distance, and you don't like really feel the shock of it. And maybe there are some pot boilers that do that. However, I have read other ones, like, you have the option of going there and making it more intense. And I think later books of the series did that. But either way, the goal is, again, accessibility to the story, to the world, mainly to the plot, not so much, though, to the character emotions. So I would say, I think it's a fair observation, maybe slight criticism, that Left Behind, especially book one, values truth and its own strong opinions and goodness in substance, and intentionally minimizes beauty and style, because it's not trying to be a classic. It's not trying to be flowery in its prose or come up with some memorable line or moment. It's meant to be practical and functional by design. And sometimes what that prosaic style sacrifices for the sake of speed, I think that actually draws people in a different way. You're not being drawn in because you're feeling so much alongside the character, but because you just want to know what happens. And oddly enough, maybe that still has the effect of engendering deep emotions or relationships with the characters because, okay, maybe you're not being carried along by heavy emotions so much as just mere momentum. You're just driving forward. You want to know what's going to happen. You want to know what plague is going to drop or what the Antichrist is going to do next. And then later volumes, though, when we talked about this in previous episodes, like book 6, they really got serious about the emotional journey. And even kind of a rebuke to that whole don't gloat when your enemy falls idea. Rayford is like, hey, we've got the chart. We know it's going to happen. These non-believers can just go away, go somewhere. And then he gets condemned basically for this kind of culture warrior mindset, even in the middle of really very real war. And you feel too in later books, even in passing, more of the weight of hero deaths and struggles. So that's kind of my backhanded compliment there. It takes a little while for someone to discover exactly what the series is about and who the characters are. And I really think that altogether, even following the constraints of the genre and the desire to broaden out to as many readers as possible, I think that works for the Left Behind series. I think it offered, starting in book 1, a different kind of beauty. Brisk and efficient writing by a trained and practiced professional, repetition of key ideas, and popular accessibility, all of which set the course for the runaway success of this series starting 30 years ago in 1995.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, what do you think about Left Behind? Have you read it, listened to it, experienced the whole series, or just the first book? Do you expect the rapture at any moment or some other event? What did you or your parents think about it when you first read it? And, my pastor didn't directly mention this book, but it helped me to see that this book is kind of like comfort food because we see that our steadfast in suffering shows that the gospel is real and judgment is coming on all who oppose Christ. And that's a pretty good, reassuring, maybe a hard but true message. But it shows that our persecution and suffering for the kingdom of God matters to Jesus. So that's kind of how I take it. What do you think? Send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com or tag us on social media. Now we're going to turn to a couple notes we got in the comm station. One is from Mandy, who wrote in reply to I'm not actually sure which episode, but this is a recent message. She says, quote, "So I am not really a sci-fi dystopian reader, but I follow Lorehaven and Enclave for my voracious teen readers. My shocking love was the Chaos Grid and Crierstone books from Lindsay Llewellyn. Well done. I actually read them each in one sitting and stayed up way too late doing so," unquote. Well, that is a good endorsement for my teen daughters to go try those. So I hope if they're listening to this, that they will go give those a try. We also got a message from Lydia, who just wrote us in response to episode 294 last week. She says, quote, "Your point about sci-fi, fantastical exploration, and dominion taking being a huge part of our future in the new heavens and new earth reminds me of my favorite quote from Wayne Thomas Batson in his book, The Door Within, where he says where the last chapter of the last book ends with the hero asking the God figure, the king, if there will be adventures in his kingdom. The king smiles and says, more than you can possibly imagine. That line changed my perspective on eternity completely. Several educational years later, I'm a post-millennial and eager for stories that can transcend time and inspire generations to take dominion of the world for Christ's kingdom. Here's to an increase of that in years to come," unquote. And, Lydia, I would highly recommend the Lamb Among the Stars trilogy by Chris Wally, a post-millennial sci-fi trilogy, one of my favorite books, series of all time. Just a fantastic read, published by Tyndale about 25 years ago. So around the same time as the Left Behind books were coming out, this was kind of the quiet underdog of a very different eschatology. So check those out. And if you find, listener, other books in this other eschatology that you enjoy, especially in the sci-fi fantasy space, please let us know.
Yeah, Mandy, I just want to say, we should reach out to Mandy, really. Yes, I think you are a sci-fi dystopian reader, at least if you've read Lindsay Llewellyn's books in that duology, The Chaos Grid and Crier Stone. Well, that makes you a reader. So welcome. Glad you're listening. Really glad. And Lydia, hope you appreciated the post-millennialism shout out earlier. As Zach mentioned, you can get at least one intriguing series out of that particular scenario. But no matter where we put the pre-mid or post, I love that emphasis on the new heavens and new earth. So really appreciate that encouragement. If you stick around Lorehaven in this podcast, you will hear a lot more call outs to that, because that really gives us that eternal perspective that we're looking forward to, not just an airy-fairy floaty heaven someday, although that would be better by far than sinning here. But Jesus has also promised specifically to unite heaven and earth. So I always like to end when I can and kind of get that flavor in, especially around the new year. And I do appreciate wherever we do get that blessed hope amidst even the Left Behind series, even if we do disagree with its particular version of the colorful chart. Next on Fantastical Truth. Well, we've talked about a bunch of authors here, and we love talking about authors at Lorehaven, but this podcast and other resources focus on readers, and will continue to do so, by the way. That's why when we sometimes get notes on our website or comments from aspiring writers, they will post questions like, well, where can I find an agent? Or, will you look at my unpublished manuscript? Well, we don't really have much to share in that department. We'll refer you elsewhere until now. We are journeying into new lands as kind of a side quest for our fan-centric mission. But this month, we are launching what we call the Lorehaven authorship within our Lorehaven Guild on Discord. So next week, we'll explore how these new digital discipleship channels, pro live streams, and our fan-focused book festival will help authors cultivate their God-given creative purpose for his glory. And I think that is what Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins did. You may disagree with how they did it or why they did it or their end time scenario, but one way or another, these two chaps wanted to glorify God. And when we were talking with Jerry Jenkins as well, you could just see him get emotional himself, thinking about all the people who found Jesus because of this series. And one way or another, that is what it's about. You may preach him specifically or let him haunt the back rooms of the story, but either way, Jesus gets glory through these stories. That's our quest at Lorehaven, to find the best Christian-made fantasy and sci-fi, to glorify him as we continue to seek and find in this new year his fantastical truth.